So we will go ahead into the next question now, and all of us can share our thoughts. The question is, how did Prabhupada protect his female disciples, both materially and spiritually? This is a very, very important and a very relevant question for this panel in the Vaishnava community. Srila Prabhupada's example, Srila Prabhupada's words, and Srila Prabhupada's direction is is an epitome of great examples. Is very hope giving, and it's also very directive. So, we would like to ask Uttama Prabhu and Parth Prabhu to share their thoughts on this question, please.
I'd like to reflect on the time when we joined in the 1970s. It was a small temple. Actually, it was just a house with about 35, 40 devotees packed in this house. And everyone was totally absorbed in Srila Prabhupada and trying to fulfill Prabhupada's mission. And it was very much a family atmosphere. Um, um, Many of the problems we have today with toxic masculinity didn't really exist or weren't very surfacing very much at that time. Everyone was pretty much treated as an equal. Um, um, I have very, very fond memories of that time, and it was just like moving into this huge family. And Prabhupada actually created that kind of atmosphere. And something happened over time that disrupted that, which is a whole other story. But I think that's what we have to strive for is not understanding how Srila Prabhupada, he encouraged everyone, men, women, whoever you were, whatever abilities and talents you had, Prabhupada encouraged people to be the best they could and to flourish in Krishna consciousness. And nobody felt suppressed, nobody felt stifled. And I think that's the mood that Srila Prabhupada would want us to try to recreate in a society to create a very healthy society.
One thing that I found interesting was that Srila Prabhupada created ashrams for women, and it wasn't really in the history of Vaishnavism that there was like brahmacharini ashrams, but Prabhupada says, I see that they want to participate, so I have to make a circumstance where they can be protected to engage within Krishna consciousness. So that's one example. And on the other side, I have a few friends or friends of friends who Srila Prabhupada saw that their husbands were not treating them well. And he suggested separation, and he would chastise the husband. And in one instance, he told the lady to leave because the husband was just downright abusive. So Srila Prabhupada was very sensitive to that when he saw that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Any connection to Prabhupada and Prabhupada disciples is such a pleasure to witness and to be a part of. Thank you. Krishna Babu, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
In 1972, there was quite a paradigm shift in our movement. And actually, when the first year I was appointed on the National Council here in Australia, I did a presentation on the importance of women in ISKCON. And there I talked about that paradigm shift, and I've talked to lots of my god sisters about it. And it's not that came from Srila Prabhupada at all.
Which?
But this discrimination against women, that Prabhupada wasn't discriminating against women at all. But in our movement, around 1972 and 1973, there was a big paradigm shift where women were not given equal opportunity. Srila Prabhupada gave equal opportunity to his disciples, so many female disciples, in so many ways. Kaushalya he asked her to open up a temple in Bangalore. I don't think she did, but he asked her to. They would do arti right before Srila Prabhupada. They would give lectures. And Malati describes how when, I think it was the Mayapur laying of the foundation stone, and all of Prabhupada's godbrothers came. This is the very early days in Mayapur. And you know what Prabhupada did? He asked Malati to speak. And she describes this, that, you know, she said, I wasn't a scholar, I wasn't very learned, and here Prabhupada is asking me to speak in such a historic moment in front of all of his sannyasi godbrothers. And she said, what was the best thing for me to speak about was about Srila Prabhupada. So she spent that time glorifying Prabhupada. But in our movement, there was that discrimination, and many of my god sisters have spoken about that. And very fortunately, it has improved. It has improved now. But even in 1976, actually, there was a resolution passed that the women, the single mothers in the movement, because they were a financial drain on the society, because they had young children, they couldn't go out and Sankirtan, they'd actually passed a resolution that those single mothers would leave the temples and go and stay on a farm. So Balavanta Prabhu talks about this. He took the GBC resolution book up to Srila Prabhupada, because Prabhupada would ratify all of the resolutions. And I think it was the days when they still had the TP, the temple president meetings. And Prabhupada was looking at the different resolutions. And when he came to that, he was, you know, he paused, and Balavanta describes he was very grave. And then Prabhupada said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, I set up this movement for both boys and girls, meaning this is not just for the men. And Balavanta said, oh, so Srila Prabhupada, you don't ratify that resolution? And Prabhupada said no. So immediately it got scratched out. And then in 1971, I think it was, and Madhavananda speaks about this in his memories, Prabhupada was there in Calcutta Temple, and he went for a walk, his morning walk. And one of the brahmacharis was complaining to Prabhupada about the women. And there are only 4 or 5 women in Calcutta Temple. I think Yamuna was one, Palika, maybe Kaushalya. And he was just going on the whole morning walk, how these women are such a distraction. They don't cover their head. They don't do this. They don't do that. Prabhupada didn't say anything, because Prabhupada would sometimes, that old English proverb of give a dog a rope long enough and he'll hang himself. So sometimes Prabhupada would let that go on. And then when they got back to the temple after the morning walk, the temple door was shut, of course, because, there was no one there to make sure that everything was safe. So they shut it before the morning program, and they knocked on the door. And when the door opened, all the girls that were there had come rushing to the door to see Prabhupada, and they offered their obeisances. And then Prabhupada turned to that brahmachari and he said, these girls are angels. And if you offer your obeisances to them, you will become liberated. So all in a perfect moment, he established how he felt about his female disciples. And Palika once had a torn sari. She was a young sannyasi widow. And Prabhupada was so disturbed that she was wearing a torn sari that he gave money, from his own money, so that a new sari could be purchased for her. And I could spend half an hour talking to you about all of those examples of Prabhupada's love and his respect for the women. But I do have to be honest and say there were times in our movement where women were not treated properly. And fortunately, we have a lot more advocacy for women now. And, there was an example in the 80s of a domestic violence situation. And I remember the temple president of the temple said, oh, I can't get involved. I can't say anything to this particular man, this particular devotee, because he never listens to us. So we have a lot of work to do in advocating for the protection and the rights of all devotees, of course, but particularly the vulnerable.
We were actually spared from a lot of that paradigm shift in Vancouver because we had a temple president who was quite a strong family man.
Oh,
And
good.
I remember one time, one brahmachari was complaining about the ladies chanting in the temple room. And the temple president went in the office and he had this Prabhupada letter. He had a copy of it on file and he pulled it out and he read it to these men. And in this letter, Prabhupada said, if the men are disturbed by the women chanting in the temple, they should go in the forest and chant with the monkeys.
That's wonderful.
So we were fortunate. There was a bit of a bubble in Vancouver until maybe like the 80s when that kind of negative influence started to infiltrate.
I wasn't quite sure what you misunderstood that I said, but anyway, I agree with what you're saying. My point was that Prabhupada was so magnanimous to allow women to live in the temple. That was my point.
Oh, yes. Definitely. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I mean, he was a visionary. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, he didn't allow women to live in the temple. They would come and do service in the day, and then they would go back to their homes. The only exception that Prabhupada made to that was in India. He didn't like the unmarried Indian-bodied girls then to live in the temple. And I lived in India for about 12 years in those early days. And, we had some Bengali Matajis who would come in the day in Calcutta, this is, and then they would go home at night to their families. But yes, I mean, Prabhupada was such a visionary and a trailblazer that he allowed women to live in the temples. But I just want to finish with a funny story. When I joined in Melbourne Temple, end of 1972, I wasn't allowed to drive because I was a woman and therefore less intelligent. And I was like, oh, okay, well, whatever. I didn't let that stop me from becoming a devotee or trying to be a devotee. But yes, there was some pretty weird attitudes, but they were not Prabhupada's attitude, not at all.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for this very exciting and very enlightening discussion. Radharani Prabhu, you'd like to conclude this question?
Yeah. So, of course, all of them have spoken very beautifully. I don't know about so many personal dealings, but I understand one thing, that Srila Prabhupada is our Acharya. So when an Acharya does something, he's speaking much more than, when he's doing it, than when he's actually even speaking about it. Because he's showing how it should be done. And throughout his life, he always respected all the women whom he was in touch with. And he showed that he cared for them. So that speaks a lot. So people quote out of context about what Prabhupada has written in some purports or something, Srimad Bhagavatam, something, or from Manu Samhita, something. But look at what he did. Mahajano yena gathasa panta, that we follow what he did. So everywhere there was respect and care for everyone, and especially for women and children. He went out of his way to stress that they should be protected. When he spoke a little about Varnashram Dharma, there also he spoke about protection. Unfortunately, people may take that word protection and twist it according to their understanding. But he always protected. And I remember one instance which I've heard where there was a lot of controversy when Yamuna Prabhu's Govindam Adi Purusham was, to be played in temples. And Prabhupada said it should be played all over the world, in all our ISKCON temples, when there was a discussion. So that itself says a lot. Because for him,
he said her voice.
Yeah.
He said her voice is the voice of bhakti.
Yes. And that's still happening. So I would say that just by his behavior with his female disciples, with in all his dealings, there was so much respect and so much concern, so much care that, it says a lot. It says a lot about what he thought about this. And Mataji, Krishna Rupa Prabhu already mentioned that he even asked people to separate when there was a lot of abuse or when there was difficulty. So it's kind of you to share that, because many a time people go by, that it's not Vedic to separate, it's not right. And then they go into this, they have this guilt trip, where they are actually killing themselves by remaining in the relationship. So they need to know that we have to do the right thing at the right time. So protecting, in fact, I always tell clients that if you are staying there, you are actually allowing him to commit more and more offenses. So if you actually care for him, go away from there, take care of yourself and pray that that good sense prevails someday for him. Because if he's committing so many offenses against a Vaishnava, we don't know what will be his destination. So you have to move out so that you don't allow him to continue with those offensive behaviors. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Krishna Prabhu.
Thank you for allowing me to just add something to Radharani Mataji's comment there. Prabhupada actually said that in 7th canto, I just don't have the exact chapter and verse on hand, but Prabhupada actually said in this purport, it was very interesting. He said that if the husband is not dharmic, I mean, that's not his words, but if the husband's not dharmic, then she should actually live separately from him because he's not qualified to be served. It's very, very interesting purport, which I just read recently. And also in Japan, Prabhupada was visiting a temple in Japan, or was Sudama, then not married, Sudama and his wife Chintamani, they'd set up a small little center in Japan. And a young American couple had been passing through and they'd come to see Prabhupada. And a report got back to Prabhupada that the husband was abusing the wife, was using physical violence. And then Prabhupada said that a man who beats his wife is a dog and she should leave him. And I'd heard that my god sister Chintamani had said that, so I contacted her and said, can you verify this? Did Prabhupada actually say that? Because sometimes, it might be what Prabhupada said, but you don't know where that provenance is. So she verified, and Prabhupada said, yes, she should leave him. And so many of our devotees are laboring under the false understanding, just like Radharani was saying, that we must stay together. I mean, I'm not advocating divorce by any means, but you can't stay in an abusive situation that is, of course, having a great ill effect on the children as well as yourself. And of course, the person who's perpetrating that violence as well. He's going to be suffering so much. But it's it's very sad that there's that stigma involved. And I hate to say this, but sometimes I have heard that someone's guru will tell them, just stay in your marriage. When it gets really bad, just move out of home for a while. And then when things calm down, go back again. And that's the cycle of abuse, right? It's an explosive situation. The abused person decides to leave. The abuser tries to get them to come back. Oh, I only did this because I love you so much. I'll never do it again. I promise. I've changed. Da 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 da. And then there's that's the remorse period. Then there's that honeymoon period when things are going nicely, and then slowly that that abuse starts building up again, and then it just explodes, and it's this cycle of violence. So to use, of course, our GBC resolution is that it's not accepted that scripture can be used to condone any form of domestic violence. And the Shiksha gurus or the Diksha gurus of people need to be educated about domestic violence as well. Otherwise, they'll give poor advice, like this particular guru did.
That's why I think this discussion is here on how men can participate in resetting the understanding of what abuse is. Because in your example, that leader is not understanding, he's thinking that it's a relationship issue. But abuse is not a relationship problem. Abuse is a power and control problem. It's not a relationship problem. So he's giving a relationship fix to something that isn't a relationship problem. So that's where we have to make that awareness there. And also, I see that involving men more in the discussions can be very, very helpful for resetting the tone for what is sattvic masculinity, and can actually even improve the lives of men just by them entering into this discussion on domestic violence. And men hearing from other well-balanced men, what is a Vaishnava standard for protection and being a husband and being a man. And so I think that the more we can involve men in this discussion, the faster the correct understanding will be disseminated, and perhaps we can do a little bit more sooner.
The last 4 years has been a men's retreat. Actually, 5 years. 3 years it was live, and 2 years was online. It was called the Mantra Retreat, and the whole thrust of the I was a part of the organizational part of that retreat, and it's to try and re-educate men actually what healthy masculinity looks like and what protection means, and trying to create good husbands.
I wish you and your wife could come out to Australia sometime and give seminars for us.
We accept your invitation.
I'll explore it at our next council meeting.
Thank you for all these thoughts. I think these thoughts are so beautifully structured, and especially bringing out Prabhupada's position on this subject matter with examples and stories were very relevant and very apt. In my little understanding of the mood of Prabhupada, anything that is valuable, like for example, glass, it has to be protected, right? Whenever you transport glass from one place to another, you have to be very careful, and it has to be protected because it's very delicate, and delicate things break very easily. Women, their hearts are very delicate, and therefore, the idea of protection is always connected with sensitivity. Srila Prabhupada was so sensitive in the way he dealt with women disciples, the way he spoke to them, the way he addressed them, the way he encouraged them, because that sensitivity is actually the most powerful way in which anyone can protect something that is valuable and something that is so delicate. I lived in an ashram where 150 men live together, and I know what it means to be living among men, and a lot of times, in fact, most of the times, men are not really sensitive, and they don't really bother about each other's needs and interests and concerns as such. You create an ashram and you create a sevasthan. A sevasthan is a place where, sick people are taken care of. Many times, a sick person is there, and it's not exactly possible for a man to take care of a sick person, because there's a little lack of sensitivity to a great extent in men, But for when it comes to women, the hearts are so soft and so delicate, and it's very natural for them to be sensitive, right? So here, in my understanding of how Prabhupada dealt and protected women, I feel one of the most powerful ways Prabhupada did it is by being sensitive and understanding how delicate it is to deal with women. And therefore, even today, 50 years down the line, there are so many women that can vouch for how Prabhupada really encouraged them and protected them, And Prabhupada didn't do big things for all of them, but those little sensitive things that he did really touched their hearts. And I feel this is one of the greatest examples that any man in history, when he's studying Prabhupada's example, can take as a way to value, way to protect, and way to encourage women in their services. We are coming now to the last question for this discussion, and I think we've had a beautiful panel and everyone adding so much value and so much uh, enlightenment to the subject matter. So the last question that we will all take up now is, within ISKCON history, what have the consequences of failing to protect women been? How did this affect our preaching mission? What will the future of ISKCON be if we do not address this issue now? Can we ask Radharani Prabhu to please kindly go ahead, share your thoughts?
Yeah, so I don't know so much about the past history, but I can speak about the now that I am dealing with or that I am watching, and some thoughts about the future. So when the women are not taken care of, women and children are not taken care of, as part of Varnashram Dharma, it is mentioned that women, children, elderly, and cows should be protected. They should be taken care of. Ideally, in the Vedic tradition, the woman is considered to be a representative of Shri Lakshmi Devi. She is protected. When there are those marriage vows taken, there are so many mantras which speak about protection. And they also speak about control. But what they do is, what do they speak? When they take the rounds around, when they circumambulate the fire, the first 3 times, the man follows, the woman leads. Because those are her departments. Lakshmi Devi is in charge of finance, right? Parvati Devi is in charge of the graha, the home, and Saraswati Devi is in charge of knowledge. So women are actually empowered. They are empowered with the strength to manage all these very nicely, right? And then in the last, the husband, she follows the husband in terms of the what work, what profession, what he is doing, right? Now, women are doing that too, right? They are doing that too. The point is that women are empowered. Nowhere in the Vedic tradition has it been said that they should be suppressed. Because when the woman of the house is happy, then Lakshmi Devi comes. I have seen this personally, that the men cannot be happy if they are themselves not happy. When they are abusing their wives, they cannot be happy themselves. They cannot be stable. So it makes sense that you as a Vaishnava, you respect everybody else. So charity begins at home. Start with your own family. Be respectful, loving, concerned, and sensitive to the needs of your own wife and children. Not that you are preaching outside, giving very wonderful classes and helping people, but at home your family is suffering. So taking care of the family it starts with that. I remember once hearing a Bhagavatam class in which one of our sannyasis mentioned that he was talking about what is ashram. That the verse is where Narad Muni comes to meet, he comes to meet Vedvyas. And it's described that he was sitting in the ashram. So what is ashram? Ashram is a place where shelter is given. So if we are staying in Grihastha ashram, it means there has to be shelter. And when there is no safety and security in a shelter, we can't call it a shelter anymore. So therefore, if we want to maintain this model of Grihastha ashram, there has to be ashray. There has to be security and shelter. It's one of the most important needs. Without Lakshmi being there, Narayan won't stay there. So if you are not protecting and respecting and taking care of the women in your life, sorry, Narayan won't come. Where is the Krishna Bhakti? It won't happen. How can you be Krishna conscious when you're causing so much pain to other living entities? Devotees. They are devotees. This is my wife, this is my child. Rest everyone is devotee. Then what about them? Are they not devotees? So this consciousness needs to be created. Otherwise, where will the preaching lead to? So in that lecture, this senior sannyasi, he said that if you are throwing pots and pans at each other in the house and you are preaching to people, why would they want to join ISKCON? If this is what they are saying. But if you are having a very good family, you are having good relationships, you are behaving in a very considerate and kind way with your family members, you are behaving with your family the same way that you are doing outside, then people will be impressed. We are not doing this to impress people, but that will be a byproduct. That when you are having a stable and happy family where everybody is growing, everyone is happy, then people will want to take up Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, they feel, oh, this is what happens. Then we don't want to join. Right? So it is a part of preaching because it's achar and prachar, both. So how we live our life becomes very, very important here, because we just by practicing we can preach, and we can preach by speaking. Then we can do both. But most important is that we need to first practice. We need to believe what we are speaking about, and we need to put it into action. When we are saying Trinadapi Sunichena, it is not only in lectures. We need to apply those principles in our own life. Then it will have more effect when we speak also. If we are not following, our words will be hollow. They won't really touch people's hearts. So this is what I feel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. Krishna Babu, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you, Radharani Prabhu. I really liked the points that you're making there. That even though someone may not know what's going inside your home, that behavior reflects in your Shakti, I guess you could say, in your preaching Shakti, because purity is the force. So if you behave in one way at home, you know, using violence in the home, for example, that you put on this very, you know, Pakka Vaishnava guise, it's not going to be genuine and it's not going to have power. And we need to think, okay, if Prabhupada came to my home, if we heard a knock on the door and we opened the door and there's Prabhupada, would he be pleased with what he's seeing or hearing in the home? So it's really the greatest hypocrisy for a devotee to use violence in the home. And we've all probably heard very terrible stories about things, you know, that happen. And it's hard to believe that, oh, devotees could perpetrate these things. So yeah, having that authentic, genuine desire to improve. And you know, this is not all about just pointing the finger. It's about, okay, if you're having some difficulties, if you are a perpetrator, then seek professional help. There's lots of men's helplines out there. You know, you can get specific counseling to try and eradicate this. And of course, you touched on before that that gender violence really starts even in childhood. So that primary prevention is very important. And I heard an interesting example from a professional friend of mine, professional who works in the area of gender-based violence. And she says it even starts in the sandpit. I know I'm going a little off topic here, but I really wanted to mention this. And she gave the example, there's the grandma, there's the daddy in the supervising the two young kids, her two young grandchildren, little boy, little girl. And little girl's happily playing with a toy in the sandpit. Her little brother wants the toy, so he goes up and bangs her on the head with something. And she cries and he takes away the toy. Then the granddaughter goes, Daddy, 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 Grandma, Grandma, Nilesh hit me on the head. And the grandma goes, it's okay, it's okay. Let him have the toy, let him have the toy. Don't fuss, don't fuss. So the little boy is learning that he can get what he wants by using violence. And a little girl is learning that, well, I have to accept it. So that primary prevention is so important. And we talked about that cross-generational cycle of abuse. So when children, and they get terribly affected by domestic violence, they learn those patterns of behavior. So I just wanted to say that. It's a little off topic, but before we finish up. So yeah, it's so important that we have that honesty. And if we're falling short, then we just have to do something about it. We have to admit to ourselves. We have to be brave enough and strong enough to think, right, this is not right. I need to get help to stop this abusive pattern that I have in my family.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for adding in your thoughts. We will now request Uttama Prabhu and Parth Prabhu to share their conclusive thoughts on this, especially on from the history of ISKCON point of view, and how domestic violence and how specifically about failing to protect women, how it has had consequences on our movement, and how is it affecting our preaching, and what will be the future of ISKCON if we do not address this issue now. Thank you.
It's going to actually very dramatically affect our preaching if we don't come to some higher standards on this, because the whole world is looking on how philosophies, how they protect the environment and how they protect women. And that's their criteria for judging if something's acceptable or going to be followed or not. So it's really, right now in history, it's a major time to improve this. Otherwise, we are not going to be accepted. We can convince ourselves, how lofty our philosophy is, but if we can't actually put it into practice to show these two things, we are not going to be accepted. It's going to ruin our preaching. It's essential. And we see that, our history in ISKCON, we haven't had a great track record in applying our theology to women very well. Krishna Rupa was explaining how, in the 70s, there was a certain macho mentality that kind of crept in, despite Prabhupada's mood. And I believe that it just came from generational abuse in the families that they came from. And so therefore they're looking with their glasses and reading the scriptures and thinking that, this traditions that I experienced that were very negative towards women, or maybe a little power and control for men, it was starting to be perpetrated because of their generational traditional upbringings. And so I feel that even Shastra was read with those glasses, and not so much taking Prabhupada's, example and examining closely what he really wanted the understanding to be. So I think that we have to learn from those mistakes, how when we take our unhealthy lenses and apply it to Krishna consciousness, we're doing a lot of damage to each other and to perpetuating the philosophy in a healthy way. And so the onus is really on us to clean up our acts in this regard.
What we did today, we painted a picture. On one side, there's a picture of love and bhakti and trust and protection of women and harmony. And the other side of the picture, there's toxic masculinity, control, domination, manipulation, abuse. And it's not that hard of a choice to decide, which one of those worlds do you want to live in? And we all actually have that choice, that every one of us has a choice which one of those worlds we want to live in, and which one of those worlds do we want to contribute to. having more people live in. And I think as a society, we really have to consciously realize that we have to make that decision literally from moment to moment. Um, as Krishnaroopa and Radharani were saying, that we actually have to live the philosophy, not just, preach it when we're on the Vyasasana or on Sankirtan, and the rest of the time we're a different creature. But we actually have to learn to live the philosophy and integrate it in our lives so we can actually be compassionate human beings. And it's so important that we see those two realities and realize that both realities are there in our society, and we have to do what we can to, as Srila Prabhupada said in his statement of purpose, he desired through a systematic process of education to correct the imbalance of values in society to create peace and tranquility. Because in that peaceful, harmonious, loving, protected world, you are going to be tranquil and you will be able to execute spiritual life in a powerful way.
So I think that's the purpose of these panels, is to try to make that shift, to help us choose the healthy alternatives.
It's about the education, isn't it?
Yes.
Not pointing the finger. I just wanted to show you. I don't know if you can see it because I've got a virtual background there, but this is a gatefold A5 brochure that I published, and it's in all of our temples in Australia. It's called Domestic and Family Violence, Love Shouldn't Hurt. And it pulls out as a gatefold. And it talks about, what is abuse, how we can help, stop abuse, about being an active bystander. It has the GBC resolution, and it has contact resources to go to in all of our different states. And I think that's also important, that we understand that we need to head people off to professional help. I mean, Radharani is, you're professionals, you have counselling degrees, etc. But domestic violence is such a specific niche situation that we shouldn't be afraid. First off, are you safe? Second, go to the police. I'll go with you to the police, but you have to go to the police. And I don't know about in other parts of the world, but in Australia, there's a legal system called mandatory reporting. So if children are involved in a domestic violence situation and you're aware of that, legally, a citizen is obliged to report it to the child services. So, of course, child abuse, child sexual abuse, neglect, and also children who may be victims in a domestic violence situation. So we need to really direct devotees, help them to go to the right sources. If they don't want to go to the police, then to help them contact all of the different helplines that are available as well. And always safety first, safety first, safety first. And I saw a news report recently that there are safe rooms actually in supermarkets where a victim of domestic violence can go, because often in an extreme case, even a GPS tracker, a tracker might be put into the woman's car, the victim's car. She'll be grilled. Where did you go? What did you do today? So, everyone has to go shopping, go to the mall, so she can say, oh, no, I went to the mall and I got this and I got that. But there is a very discreet, safe room where a victim can go to seek help and advice. And if you go on any of the websites, there'll always be that escape button. Yes. So the person is, the victim is on a helpline and the abuser comes in the room or they come home, then they've got an immediate escape button that just directs to some other kind of website. So safety is a really genuine concern. In Australia, 1 woman a week is murdered as a result of domestic violence, and 1 man a month. So we know that it's across the globe, and particularly during COVID, it increased exponentially. So it is a real problem. And because where ISKCON is a microcosm, part of that macrocosm, where do ISKCON members come from? They come from the macrocosm. And we come into ISKCON with all of our different, samskaras and our different anatas and learned behavior that might be very damaging.
On the Grihastha Vision Team website is called VaishnavaFamilyResources.org. There's actually a section on domestic abuse, and there's actually a list of resources, including how to make an escape plan.
Great. So I think we've had a fantastic discussion. We've covered quite a lot of different angles of looking at this very complicated issue. I would like to conclude this panel by putting in 2 or 3 thoughts that might really help us absorb this in a better way and address it in the right mood. We all speak about the 4 regulative principles, and we all follow the 4 regulative principles, of which no meat eating is one of the principles. Following the principles of no meat eating on an external level is so easy. But without understanding what that principle represents, we're doing it on a mechanical level. No meat eating essentially represents the principle of compassion. So we may be very compassionate on the table, on the dining table, but at the same time, we may not be compassionate to a person staying with us. So what is a point in being compassionate to an animal on the table, and being extremely violent to a human being next to us? So we have to learn to expand the horizons of the 4 regulative principles. And the more we are able to accommodate and expand the horizons of these 4 regulative principles, that much more we understand the essence of what these principles are about. The essence of this regulative principle that we're talking about is compassion. And to the extent we are not following it, we're actually breaking one of the 4 principles. And domestic violence technically falls under the category of breaking the principle of compassion. And so which means if somebody says that, I'm following the 4 regulative principles, but I'm abusing someone at home, you're technically not following the principle because you're not following the spirit of that principle. The second thought that I would like to share here is something from science. Einstein proposed a theory known as the pain wave theory. This is called the Einstein's pain wave theory. You can Google for it and you will get a lot about it. According to Einstein's pain wave theory, whenever someone cries in pain, it could be an animal, it could be a human, anyone who cries in pain, the pain of that person, it triggers the seismic waves. Seismic waves are waves which cause earthquakes. So if there is an earthquake happening somewhere around, it could be the result of a lot of people crying in pain. Typically, if you look at places like Chicago and many other places in the world where there is so much of animal slaughter happening, those are the places that are most prone to earthquakes. So when we're talking about pain, we're not talking only from the point of view of slaughter, as I was saying, no meat eating. So we may be trying to protect pain over there, but how much pain are we causing human beings by doing this whole idea of perpetrating abuse? And every abuser needs to understand that they are responsible for so much damage, not only to human hearts, but to the environment. Because the more we add pain to the world, the more pain comes back to us in different forms. That's how nature gives it back to us. And I would like to conclude by talking about a very important principle that Lord Ram asks Bharat. When Bharat comes to Chitrakoot to meet Lord Ram to take Ram back to Ayodhya, Ram and Bharat have a beautiful discussion, of which many things that Ram asks Bharat are in the form of questions. Whether he is doing this as a king, So Ram is asking a series of questions to Bharat, whether you're doing this to be, to be a good king, whether you're doing this. And one of the things that Ram asks Bharat is, are you taking care of women well? And specifically, Ram asks this question. He says, where women are protected and taken care well, that society thrives. And where women are abused and not protected, cause pain, that society gets destroyed. Having that in mind, leaving the words of Lord Ram in everybody's mind, we'd like to end this panel. Thank you very much. It has been a great privilege and honor to be on this panel with all of y'all, and very wonderful hearing all your thoughts and words on the subject matter. And hopefully, everyone hearing and participating in this panel will understand the importance, relevance, and its seriousness, and help everyone on this panel propagate this further and create a world which is pain-free, a world that is free from violence, and a world that is beautiful to live in a safe and in a happy environment. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Bol.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama.